Hello, my name is Jaru. Today I'm talking about Deltarune. There will be major spoilers for both Deltarune and Undertale, so please play them both before watching this. Today I'm going to be revisiting the alternate timeline versus alternate reality discussion, which was the focus of my first Deltarune video. In that video, I tried to deduce whether Deltarune was an alternate timeline or an alternate reality with regards to Undertale, and I ultimately concluded that it was an alternate timeline. Well, after doing some more thinking and looking at more evidence, I've come here today to announce that I have changed my mind. I now believe that my original conclusion from that video was wrong. This video is going to consist of me explaining why I changed my mind, how I think the Toby Fox multiverse actually functions, and briefly discuss how this impacts the rest of my theories. Without further ado, let's get into it. Before we can explore how my understanding of the Toby Fox multiverse has evolved, we first have to understand what exactly it was that I got wrong in the first place. The root of my problem comes from the way determination works in Undertale. You see, determination allows you to warp reality in a variety of ways, with the most prominent example of this being the ability to save and load. On the surface, loading a save file seems like you're just traveling back in time. However, this isn't actually the case. Upon loading your save file or resetting the game entirely, characters will have deja vu of the previous timeline, which shouldn't be possible if you were actually time traveling, as time traveling would have prevented them from forming those memories in the first place. As a result, this shows that loading your save doesn't actually send you back in time. Instead, you are just using your power over reality to reshuffle the universe back into a previous shape, which includes using your powers to erase everyone's memories. We know that erasing memories is a power that determination provides, as Azrael uses this power against us in the final fight. However, for some reason, memories cannot be completely erased. Some part of their soul still remembers the previous timelines, which is why they have deja vu and why you can restore their memories during the final battle. Why is this so important? Well, previously, I had assumed that the way Undertale worked was that there was one singular Undertale timeline, and that determination did not let you create new timelines, but rather just let you alter the existing timeline. In other words, if you wanted to travel to a true alternate timeline, determination alone would not be enough to get you there. If you've seen my recent Sans video, then you'll know I argued that Sans was able to hop between timelines by using a special machine, and that without this machine, he would not be able to get back to his original timeline. I believed all this because it seemed to me like the only way to reasonably explain Deltarune being so similar to Undertale was if it was an alternate timeline. If Deltarune was a completely different universe, then it seemed rather contrived for it to be coincidentally so similar to the Undertale universe. Or at least that's how I felt at the time. You see, after analyzing Sans and doing a full video on him, I've realized an internal logic problem with this interpretation of the Undertale and Deltarune realities. It seems obvious in retrospect, but Sans himself seems to outright contradict the idea of Deltarune being just an alternate timeline. As you all know, it seems highly likely that Sans is not from the Undertale world. He seems to make this point rather clear. I argued that Sans was from an alternate timeline, specifically the Deltarune timeline, and that he traveled here using this machine. The machine then broke, which stranded him in the Undertale timeline. I concluded that it was not possible for Sans to get back to his original timeline without this machine, as I believed that determination was incapable of reaching these other timelines. That's why I said that the angel couldn't reach him here. However, this logic completely falls apart once you remember this specific quote from Sans. Our reports show a massive anomaly in the time-space continuum. Timelines jumping left and right, stopping and starting. This one line completely destroys my previous understanding of the Undertale Deltarune multiverse. Why does it do that? Simple. The anomaly Sans is talking about in this quote is Flowey. He thinks the anomaly is Frisk, but since it's possible to reach this line without using the save system even once, it's much more likely he's referring to Flowey. Although, to be clear, it doesn't actually matter who the anomaly is. Whoever he's talking about is using the saving and loading power. Sans has access to Gaster technology, which is more than likely to be how he's able to detect alterations to the timeline, and he makes it painfully clear in this line that multiple timelines are in play. Some timelines randomly appear, then disappear, while other timelines are swinging all over the place. This proves that Flowey's various uses of his saving and loading powers constitute full-blown alternate timelines. Do you see why this is such a huge problem? If Sans has such in-depth understanding of how determination and timelines work, then he should know full well that it's possible for him to acquire that power, which means that his goal of returning to his home timeline should be far more achievable than he makes it out to be. Sans is smart enough to realize that he only needs one soul to cross the barrier, and he's powerful enough to kill a human or steal a soul from Asgore if he needs to, which means that Sans becoming a god is an extremely valid option. And yet, he insists that there's no way for him to get home. He's literally given up on that possibility. This means that becoming a god would not solve Sans's problem, which means that determination and the ability to control alternate timelines would not let him go home. And the only way for that to be true, the only way for Sans to be trapped here, and the only way for this machine to be the only option he ever had for getting home is if Sans is not from an alternate timeline. He has to be from somewhere beyond the reach of determination. He has to be from an alternate reality. It seems so obvious now that I lay out all the facts. Sans literally talks about the alternate timelines near the start of his fight, and yet I just couldn't see what this meant for his story. And you know what the worst part is? There's more evidence that Sans is rather blatantly from another universe, and it comes from Alphys. As you'll recall from my Sans video, he and Alphys are almost certainly friends, and he almost certainly reached out to her for help with repairing his machine. That's why Frisk mentions the handwriting on this blueprint being a mixture of strange symbols, aka Gaster wingdings, and bad handwriting, as Alphys is known to have bad handwriting. This means that Alphys tried to help Sans get home. Of course, this would require that Alphys have done research on alternate realities, right? Does she actually confirm at any point that she's done such research? Unfortunately, the answer is yes. In the Mettaton quiz, if you say you don't know who Alphys has a crush on, Alphys will say, "Hey, I've done research on this. There are alternate universes out there." That pretty much puts the final nail in my coffin. Toby Fox clearly planned for Sans to be from another universe, and since I fully believe in my Sans theory, that means I have to now accept that Deltarune is, in fact, an alternate reality. However, while I have now accepted that Deltarune is a separate universe, that still doesn't address the main problem I had with this concept in my original video. Why are Deltarune and Undertale so similar if they're completely different worlds? Why did these realities follow such similar paths, with even the specific characters turning out nearly identically to their counterparts in Undertale? It's not good enough to just say, because Toby Fox felt like reusing his characters. That doesn't justify it. Toby Fox would not say that this game is for people who have completed Undertale and then have its similarity to Undertale be completely irrelevant. He would not say that these worlds are connected only for the connection to be them having a couple superficial cameos. There has to be an in-canon narrative reason for these two realities being so similar. I refuse to believe it's not important. I have too much respect for Toby Fox as a writer to assume he treated the rules of his multiverse so lazily. As such, I have come up with a new explanation for these two universes being so similar, while still allowing them to be separate realities. My new theory is that Undertale and Deltarune are parallel realities. Parallel realities, or parallel worlds, for those who don't know, are two separate universes that, despite being completely separated and disconnected, still end up being extremely similar due to them running in parallel. You've likely seen examples of this trope used before. They use it in the MCU, in which completely separate realities still end up so similar that they all have some version of Spider-Man in them. You can also see this in the Cyberman arc of modern Doctor Who, in which the Doctor stumbles into an alternate reality that is fundamentally the same as our own universe, but it has a couple distinct differences, like them using more Zeppelins, for example. The main idea of parallel realities is that you get all the benefit of having two very similar timelines with two very similar sets of characters and worlds, but with the added flexibility of having them be in separate universes. This explanation makes a lot of sense for Deltarune, as not only would it explain why Deltarune ended up so similar to Undertale despite being a different reality, but it would also explain why Sans ended up in the Undertale reality specifically. If these two universes run in parallel and are effectively next-door neighbors on the multiversal level, then Undertale would have been the very first reality Sans would encounter. And, best of all, this parallel reality explanation seems to be supported by Toby Fox himself, as on the Deltarune Steam page, he describes Deltarune as Undertale's parallel story. What more evidence could you possibly need? In summary, Deltarune and Undertale are not alternate timelines, but they are also not just random alternate realities either. They are specifically parallel realities that run side by side, which is why they are so similar while still having their own distinct traits. By the by, lots of people suggested this explanation in my comments at the time of the first video, but I just wasn't interested in discussing alternative explanations at the time. It seemed superfluous to me. Now, nearly a year later, I can acknowledge that you guys were onto something. Of course, with me changing my fundamental understanding of Deltarune, this raises the question: how does this affect my other theories? Well, the answer is that it really doesn't. My theories did rely on these games having similar histories, which was why I thought they were alternate timelines, but them being parallel realities would also allow them to have similar histories. The bottom line is that if we're assuming Toby Fox has put any thought into his multiverse, then we have to assume that all these characters wouldn't be so similar to their Undertale counterparts unless they share a very similar world history. As such, my other theories all remain completely unchanged. The only real change is that I now consider Sans to be from another reality instead of another timeline. All my other theories, thankfully, still stand. And that's just about it for this video. I'm hoping that this alteration to my depiction of Deltarune will help re-engage some of the folks who couldn't accept Deltarune being just another timeline. An issue I've noticed with making a huge network of theories like I have done is that if someone disagrees with one of your basic assumptions, then that will cause them to go into every future theory with a substantial quantity of skepticism. And I know for a fact that me building my network of theories off the back of Deltarune being an alternate timeline instantly alienated a decent chunk of folks, as it is common for most Deltarune players to just assume Deltarune is an AU. So hopefully this revision to the Jaru cinematic universe will help ground it in such a way that will allow the skeptics out there to feel more comfortable sincerely engaging with my theories. That's all from me today, but before I end the video, we've got some new fan art! First up is the latest masterpiece from Eska's Art, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, and holy god is this awesome. If you're a long-time enjoyer of the fan art section on my channel, then you'll recognize this artist, as they've provided some of the most incredible art I've ever seen, and this Oberon Smog piece is no exception. The colors, the shadows, the intensity, the design, this is all just perfect. But this isn't even the only piece they've sent me. Next is this piece depicting Chris after stabbing Asriel, and just look at this. The Rousey shirt, the horns, the long hair, the cute face, the Chris on the floor, and the chalk on the back shelf. There's so freaking much to praise about this lovely picture. Thank you so much for making this. Chris is absolutely precious in your art style. But wait, we've got one more thing to show from this artist, and this one's a video. Look at this. A masterful artist and an animator? How can so much talent be in one human being? Incredible. Susie is so freaking adorable as always, and her being a dragon is always going to be my favorite iteration of her. I do not deserve to receive such gorgeous art from someone as talented as you. Thank you so much for sharing. Next is another returning artist who submitted this awesome piece showing Chris facing off against Oberon, and I really love this. The art style is so unique and stylized, and using the light blue for Chris works really well. You can see Chris has the shadow mantle and twisted sword, while Oberon is swinging around his chain whip, and it's all so rad. Thank you very much for sharing. I always appreciate your art. Next is a newcomer with an insane depiction of the Mystery Man. Look at this horrifying thing. Gaster has always been freaky, but this is especially frightening. I love the eye and all the melty, fleshy lines blending the two halves together. Really incredible work. Thank you so much for sharing. You are incredibly talented. Next is a full-blown comic strip depicting Sans during the Roaring, and I cannot even begin to express how much this means to me. Look at this. There's 4 whole pages of this story. It's so well made. This actually made me want to cry. This is one of the most incredible things anyone has ever made for me, and it actually blows my mind to see this. I wish I had more words to express my incredible gratitude, but all I can say is thank you. You are a god, and I am utterly blessed to have received this. Next up is another returning artist who makes their art on actual paper, which is always impressive, and this time we've got quite the collage. We've got Chris, Frisk, Azrael, Gaster, Oberon Smog, Azrael getting stabbed, Sans writing his note to not forget, and, of course, the Mystery Man with a faintly visible Undertale Sans hovering behind him. Incredible piece. Seeing so many of my ideas come together and get depicted by an artist is really inspiring, and I am extremely grateful for every piece I get. They also made this awesome pixel art depicting the Undertale version of Sans interacting with Gaster, and this is also very cool. I appreciate the subtle differences in this version of Sans that distinguish him from the Deltarune Sans. Thank you so much for sharing. Next is a depiction of Oberon with an absolutely massive hammer. He's also got this Roman gladiator sort of aesthetic going on, which is quite cool, and I appreciate the angel symbol being on his helmet. We also got a close-up of his face, which looks really cool as well. I knew Gerson having a goatee would work so well for a villainous character, and this demonstrates that fact swimmingly. Awesome artwork. Thank you very much for sharing. Oh, and this being on paper and pencil is also quite impressive. Next, we have the Chad Fallen Gang back with another art piece. And this time we've got this really cool depiction of Sans trying to not forget as he flees the Deltarune reality. Awesome work, man. I love getting to see the inside of the machine, but my favorite part is the monster soul at the center of his chest, which you can see has little bits floating away, presumably due to the angel tearing away his memories. That's so freaking creative. I love it. Thank you for your contribution, as always. And last, but certainly not least, is this piece. Not only is this another hand-drawn piece, which is always really impressive, but it's also really detailed. We've got the Fun Gang battling the Angel, a wounded Sans fleeing the scene, and some cameos from Spamton and Jevil with their shadow crystals. Very cool stuff. I've often thought it would be really awesome if there was some special route where the secret bosses team up with you to fight the angel, so it's cool to see a version of that concept here. Thank you very much for sharing. And with that, we are caught up on the fan art. Thank you all so much for sharing. It always means the world to me. So even if my voice doesn't effectively communicate my excitement, please don't forget that it really does please me to no end. Thank you all for sharing, and thank you for watching my content. Like if you enjoyed the video, comment if you've got something to say, subscribe if you want to see more, and as always, have a fantastic day.